For 4 months, everyone thought he was dead. Laura sat in the living room, staring at the empty chair by the fireplace, replaying that terrible day on the lake. In her mind, the overturned kayak, the life jacket floating away, his fishing pole abandoned on the shore. She put on his favorite sweater, the one she had bought him a Christmas ago, and breathed in his scent, pine-fresh detergent, a trace of campfire smoke, as if she could will him back into the room. His name was Mark, a man she adored, a devoted husband, and a father, until the unthinkable happened. They told her he must have drowned. The authorities found nothing more than an empty craft, and her heart ached for closure she never got. She clung to hope for weeks, asking herself in the dark, how could someone so alive just vanish? But then, on a quiet Thursday afternoon, she saw him alive, smiling, walking hand in hand, with a woman half his age, in a photograph posted on social media. Mark wasn't gone. He had staged his disappearance, built a new life with someone else, and what happened next would shatter everything she believed. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. In the days after that photograph surfaced, Laura sat at her dining table staring at the screen, unable to understand what she was seeing. For months, she had mourned a man she believed she lost forever, a man whose absence left an empty seat at every meal, and a silence in their home that felt heavier with each passing day. Now, staring at an image of Mark very much alive, standing beside a young woman who looked no older than 20, a wave of confusion washed over her. Why would he vanish without a word? What could possibly make a husband leave behind the life he built, the vows he made, and the woman who had stood beside him for nearly 2 decades? How did everything they shared lead to this moment where she was left questioning whether their marriage had been real at all? These questions became the thread that pulled her deeper into a truth she never imagined. As she dug through old messages, bank statements, and pieces of his life she had never paid attention to before, a series of troubling patterns began to emerge. Mark had been withdrawing small amounts of money for months before his disappearance. He had created accounts she never knew about. There were phone records from towns he never mentioned visiting. And tucked away in the corner of his workshop, hidden beneath an old tarp, she found a backpack filled with clothes he had supposedly lost years ago. Nothing made sense anymore, and yet everything seemed connected. Tonight, we're uncovering the hidden life of a man who walked away, and the wife who walked right into his darkest secret. Before we move forward, take a moment to think. What would you do if someone you trusted simply vanished, only for you to discover they had chosen a different life without you? How would your heart react to that kind of truth? Laura often thought back to the days when she and Mark first met, long before life became heavy and complicated, back when they were just two 23-year-olds sitting in a crowded diner sharing fries and nervous laughter. She used to say he was the safe choice, the steady presence who made her feel grounded in a world that often felt unpredictable. They married young, built a small home together on the edge of town, and filled it with routines that seemed ordinary at the time but now felt like memories wrapped in soft light. Early mornings where Mark brewed coffee before work, evenings where they sat on the porch and talked about everything and nothing, and weekends spent watching their children chase each other in the yard. Life wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, honest, simple, built on a sense of partnership that Laura believed would last as long as they both lived. She truly thought she knew the man beside her, the one who promised her he'd never walk away. But as the years went on, something quiet and unsettling began to settle between them, almost like a conversation that never fully happened. Mark started coming home later, saying work was demanding more hours, and though Laura wanted to believe him, she felt a distance forming that she didn't know how to reach across. Their arguments were never explosive, just subtle disagreements that left both of them feeling unheard. Money grew tighter, responsibilities grew heavier, and the easy laughter they once shared seemed to fade into polite conversations about bills, schedules, and the kids' school events. Laura tried to reconnect, planning small dinners, suggesting weekend trips, even writing him little notes, but Mark's smile never quite reached his eyes anymore. Something was slipping, and though she sensed it, she didn't know its shape or its size. She only knew that the man she once could read so easily now felt like a stranger, whose thoughts she could no longer predict. Then came the day everything changed, the day Mark didn't come home. Laura remembered the strange stillness of that evening, how the sunset seemed dimmer, how her heart carried a weight she couldn't explain. She tried calling him, But every ring went unanswered. Hours passed, and worry turned into dread. When his car was found near the lake, abandoned with his fishing gear scattered nearby, her entire world shifted. Search teams combed the water, officers walked the shoreline, and neighbors offered support. But no trace of Mark was found. It felt as though he had simply vanished into thin air. The official reports pointed toward an accident, a tragic moment on the water. Friends brought meals, family filled her home, and she tried to accept the loss, even though something deep inside whispered that the truth was still waiting to be uncovered. She held a memorial because everyone told her it was time. But in her heart, the questions echoed louder than any goodbye she tried to say. For months, Laura lived in a quiet, restless routine. Every morning she woke with the same dull ache in her chest, a mix of longing and confusion she never learned to name. Life had settled into something that looked normal from the outside. Yet inside her home, inside her heart, nothing felt steady. Then one afternoon, as she sorted through laundry in the living room, her phone buzzed with a message she almost ignored. It was from Danielle, an old coworker who followed local community pages the way some people followed weather alerts. The message read, "Laura, I don't want to upset you, but I think you need to see this." Attached was a blurry photo taken at a gas station 2 towns over. A man pumping fuel, a young woman leaning against the passenger door, scrolling on her phone. The moment Laura zoomed in, her hands began to tremble. The jawline, the stance, the familiar way he held himself, even in a simple moment like this, it was him, alive, healthy, smiling a smile she hadn't seen in years. She stared at that picture for so long the screen dimmed twice. Her mind raced between disbelief and fury and heartbreak, trying to fit this new truth into the world she thought she knew. The man she mourned, the man everyone believed was gone, was standing casually at a gas pump, not a trace of struggle or hardship on his face. And beside him was a girl who couldn't have been older than 20, someone who seemed completely at ease in a place where Laura once stood. Something inside her shifted, something that felt like betrayal and clarity and devastation all at once. This was no accident, no tragic event, no misfortune. This was a choice, his choice. And now the life she'd tried to rebuild felt like it was cracking open all over again. Laura didn't pack a bag. She didn't tell a soul. She simply grabbed her keys, got into her car, and started driving. The road stretched for nearly 2 hours, cutting through quiet towns and long stretches of farmland, yet she could barely remember any of it. Her heart beat so loudly it drowned out the hum of the engine. When she finally reached the town where the photo was taken, she felt strangely calm, the kind of calm that comes right before a storm breaks. She parked near the station, scanning the area, unsure what she was even looking for. But then she saw him, Mark, standing outside a small bakery, holding a paper cup, chatting as if he had every right to exist in this new world he'd built. Laura stayed inside her car, her eyes fixed on him. He looked lighter, almost carefree, as if he'd shed every worry he once carried. But what broke her most was hearing something she hadn't heard in years, his laughter. A warm, easy laugh that once belonged to her, shared across their kitchen table and late-night drives. He laughed that same way now, but not with her. With the younger woman at his side, they walked down the sidewalk hand in hand, their fingers intertwined with a familiarity that made Laura's chest tighten. She followed quietly, her car crawling behind them block by block, unable to turn away from the truth unfolding right in front of her. This wasn't a man who disappeared out of fear or desperation. This was a man who walked away, willingly. The sun dipped lower as Laura continued trailing them through the small town. They stopped at a tiny market, picking up groceries as if they were settling into a weekend routine. The younger woman pointed at something on a shelf, and Mark leaned in close, smiling, his hand brushing her back in a way that made Laura's breath catch. Every moment felt like a fragment of a life she never knew existed, a life he chose to give someone else. Each step she took, each corner she turned, the truth grew heavier, the betrayal deeper, the reality undeniable. Later that evening, the quiet town shifted into shadows. People walked their dogs, shops locked their doors, and streetlights blinked awake, one by one. Somewhere in that fading blue hour, the confrontation finally happened, though no one knew exactly where or how. All that witnesses reported later was the sound. Sharp, frantic, a burst of shouting that echoed down the narrow street. Some said they heard a woman's voice, others remembered a crash, something falling, something breaking, but no one saw what unfolded in the dark. What happened next would haunt that town for months. It would divide neighbors, overwhelm investigators, and leave Laura standing at the center of a storm she never wanted but could no longer escape. By sunrise, the quiet town that rarely made the news found itself shaken. Joggers on a wooded hiking trail just outside the main road stumbled upon something they first mistook for a passed-out camper. But as they approached, the truth settled in with a chill none of them could ever forget. It was Mark. His body lay partially hidden near a slope, his clothes still neat, his watch still on his wrist, his pockets untouched. There were no signs of robbery, no torn clothing, no obvious marks that explained what happened. Just a man who, hours earlier, had been seen laughing with someone who believed he was building a future with her. The early morning air was still, carrying the scent of pine and damp leaves while officers sectioned off the scene. Paramedics whispered among themselves, unsure of what they were even looking at. It didn't fit the patterns they were used to. No struggle, no chaos, no witnesses, just an ending that raised more questions than answers. For a man who had already faked his death once, this time, it was real, and no one knew why. When officers arrived at Laura's home later that morning, she opened the door with a look that was impossible to read. Shock blended with confusion, mixed with something deeper, something weary. When they told her Mark had been found, she pressed her hand to her mouth and staggered backward, as if her legs could no longer support her. She insisted she had gone to confront him the previous night, that she'd only wanted answers, closure, anything that resembled truth. She said she'd followed him into the wooded area after he walked off during their argument, and that she found him on the ground just minutes later. She repeated that she didn't touch him, didn't see anyone else, didn't hear anything that explained what she witnessed. But as detectives recorded her statement, subtle cracks began to form. Her timeline shifted slightly each time she retold it. Sometimes she said she arrived before sunset. Other times she claimed it was nearly dark. She mentioned hearing a branch snap behind her, then moments later admitted she wasn't sure that sound actually came from the woods at all. Detectives weren't certain whether these inconsistencies were signs of guilt or the frantic confusion of someone who had just seen their entire world unravel. But every detail she offered only deepened their suspicion and their curiosity. Late that afternoon, the younger woman, Emily, walked into the police station with her hands shaking and her voice barely above a whisper. She hadn't slept, she hadn't eaten, and the moment she sat down, she began talking before anyone asked her a question. She said Mark had told her things she now wished she'd never heard, stories that painted Laura as someone volatile, unpredictable, a person he claimed he feared. Emily said he told her he faked his death because he saw no other way out of the marriage, that disappearing felt safer than staying. She explained they'd been together for 5 months, building what she believed was a new life. She admitted she thought Laura might show up eventually, but she never expected anything like this. Her words shook the investigators, but they also raised new questions. Was Mark telling Emily the truth? Or was he crafting another escape route, another narrative, another life that kept him from facing his own choices? Emily insisted Laura had followed them earlier in the evening, that Mark seemed nervous, constantly glancing over his shoulder. She remembered him saying, "If she finds us, I don't know what she'll do." But fear, love, and misinformation often mix into something impossible to untangle. Detectives noted every detail, unsure whether Emily was offering clarity or unknowingly adding more smoke to an already fogged-over picture. As the investigation intensified, detectives pulled phone records, GPS logs, and digital traces from every device connected to Mark or Laura in the weeks leading up to that night. What they found formed a complex timeline, one that didn't align neatly with anyone's claims. Mark's phone showed multiple long drives to remote areas in the months before he vanished the first time. Laura's phone showed her near the town where he'd been living just weeks before the gas station sighting, though she insisted she had never been there until the day she followed the lead. GPS data from Mark's car revealed late-night trips that he'd never explained to anyone, not even Emily. And buried in the search history of a tablet registered to Mark was a phrase that gave detectives pause: how to disappear and start over. Right beneath it was another: how long does DNA last on rocks? Those searches didn't immediately point to guilt or innocence, but they complicated the picture in ways no one expected. Was he preparing for a second disappearance? Was he planning something else entirely? Detectives believed they were closing in on answers, assembling a puzzle piece by piece. But what they didn't know was that the most startling discovery, the one that would upend everything they believed, was still waiting, hidden in the evidence they hadn't yet examined. As investigators worked through every file, every message, and every scrap of information gathered from the chaotic days after Mark's death, one officer opened a folder that would shift the entire direction of the case. Inside was a discovery that struck everyone silent. A bank account one Laura had never known existed held nearly $14,000, deposited in small amounts over several months. The account was under a name that wasn't his, yet the handwriting on the signature card matched perfectly. Cross-referencing that name revealed a rental agreement for a small apartment on the opposite side of the state, leased under the same alias. The lease had been active for 8 months, the same period during which his family and friends believed he was gone forever. Detectives drove to the apartment and watched the dust rise as they opened the door. The living room held only what he wanted in his new life: simple furniture, a few clothes, and a box under the bed filled with photos of him and Emily, smiling, posing by a lake, holding coffee cups with handwritten dates on them. 5 months earlier, the earliest documented photo displayed him looking relaxed, alive, unbothered. It was a life he created deliberately, not something hurried or desperate. There was no sign of emotional conflict, no evidence of panic or fear, only the quiet routine of someone who had chosen to start over, without a single intention of returning. For the investigators, it was the clearest sign yet. His disappearance hadn't been an accident, and it certainly hadn't been forced. He built this path step by step, but the question still remained: what had happened the night he died? When detectives confronted Laura with the discoveries, she sat in the interview room with her hands folded tightly, her eyes fixed on a point just above the table. The truth, or at least her version of it, began to spill out in fragments. She admitted she had followed him into the woods after finally realizing the man she had mourned, the man she had defended, the man she had almost destroyed herself trying to find, had been living less than 3 hours away with a new identity and a new partner. She said she'd called his name, but he kept walking. When he finally turned to face her, she described a look of irritation, not fear, not shock, just annoyance, as though she were interrupting something he believed she had no right to question. According to her, he raised his voice first, telling her she had no place in his life anymore. She said, he stepped toward her, grabbed her arm, and told her to leave before she ruined everything he had built. Her voice cracked as she claimed he shoved her backward, and in the struggle, he slipped on the uneven ground. She insisted she never intended for anything like that to happen, that everything happened too fast to understand. But her version clashed with the physical evidence, and the prosecution was quick to point that out when the case moved to trial. In court, her face remained steady as attorneys debated her intent. Some jurors watched her with sympathy, others viewed her with caution. And then came the moment that shifted the courtroom's energy completely. Emily, the younger woman, walked to the stand and with trembling hands held the microphone. Her voice wavered as she recounted conversations she'd had with Mark. She recalled a moment when he grew frustrated, venting about his past life and saying, "I wish she would just disappear." It was a line he likely said in anger, but in that courtroom, it carried a weight that settled heavily on everyone present. It painted an image of a man who wanted escape at any cost, but it also added fuel to the prosecution's argument that Laura had reason, opportunity, and motive. The air in the courtroom felt thick, every person silently wondering whether Laura's actions had been a moment of panic or something she had been pushed toward long before that night. And as this testimony echoed through the room, it became clear that the truth of what happened in those woods would not be simple, and the judgment that followed would be far more complicated than anyone imagined. As the trial reached its final days, the courtroom carried the heavy quiet that comes when the truth is no longer simple, when every detail feels both justified and unsettling. The prosecution argued that Laura acted out of rage, that discovering Mark alive with Emily triggered a moment she had been holding in for months: anger, heartbreak, and the weight of betrayal all crashing together in one irreversible decision. The defense countered that it had been a chaotic struggle, fueled by fear, confusion, and the shock of realizing that the man she had mourned, the man she had built a life with for almost 2 decades, had not only abandoned her but reinvented himself as someone who didn't even acknowledge she existed. They described her actions as an instinctive response, not a calculated one. The jury spent hours deliberating, reviewing photos of the wooded path, reading transcripts, and replaying the moment Emily told them about Mark's wish that his wife would just disappear. That single sentence seemed to sit on the edge of every juror's thoughts, whether it was a careless expression, said in frustration, or a reflection of his intention to erase himself from his past completely. When the jury returned, the courtroom fell silent. Laura stood with her hands clasped, gently trembling, but her face remained calm in a way that suggested she had already accepted whatever was coming. The verdict was read slowly, each word carrying the weight of everything the jury believed about that night. They concluded that the act had not been premeditated, nor was it entirely accidental. Instead, it was ruled a crime driven by overwhelming emotional turmoil, manslaughter. The decision struck a delicate balance between accountability and compassion. Some spectators nodded solemnly, others wiped away tears. But in that room, everyone understood this was not a story of simple guilt or innocence. It was a story of two lives stretched beyond their limits, colliding in a moment neither could come back from. Just when the case seemed resolved, police released one final detail, a discovery that reshaped the entire narrative. While combing through additional digital records recovered from a backup drive, investigators found messages Mark had drafted but never sent. They revealed plans for another disappearance, one even more elaborate than the first. He had researched job opportunities in another state and saved articles about selling belongings anonymously. In one note, he wrote about feeling trapped again, hinting that the excitement of his life with Emily had begun to fade under the reality of commitment. There were receipts for a storage unit in another state and instructions sketched out on how to transfer funds without being traced. These findings painted a troubling picture not of a man seeking a fresh start with someone new, but of someone who repeatedly ran from responsibility, from difficult conversations, from accountability, from the truth itself. It became clear he hadn't intended to build a long-term future with Emily, any more than he wanted to return to Laura. He was preparing to walk away from both women, to erase himself once again. And as this detail became public, it shifted how many viewed the case. What seemed like a story of betrayal between three people now looked like something more complicated, a pattern of escaping rather than solving problems, of disappearing rather than facing consequences. It didn't justify the final outcome, but it revealed a deeper layer that no one saw coming. When you look at everything that happened, from the marriage filled with years of routine and quiet struggles, to the sudden disappearance that left a family shattered, to the hidden life uncovered piece by piece, this story becomes more than a tragedy. It becomes a reflection of how deeply betrayal can cut and how far someone might go when pushed to a breaking point. Many watching this may relate to the quiet sacrifices of long relationships, the unspoken dreams, or the moments when trust felt fragile. Others may understand the overwhelming weight of midlife changes, reinvention, and the search for purpose. And for some, this story serves as a reminder of how lies, even small ones, can snowball into consequences no one can control. In the end, the question remains: was this a tragic accident, a moment where emotions took over? Or the final chapter of a man who had been running from his truth for years? Ask yourself, if you were in Laura's shoes, heartbroken, confused, betrayed, how would you have handled discovering the person you loved had built a life without you? Share your thoughts. Your voice matters here, and we want to hear from you. As we close this story, take a moment to reflect on everything that unfolded. A marriage built over years, a disappearance that shattered a family, a secret life created in the shadows, and a final confrontation that ended in a tragedy no one could undo. Stories like this remind us that people often carry private battles we never see, and the choices they make, whether out of fear, confusion, or desperation, can ripple far beyond what they ever imagined. For many watching right now, especially those who have lived through decades of relationships, compromises, and unexpected challenges, this story may hit closer than expected. It raises questions about trust, about communication, about how well we ever truly know the people we share our lives with. But it also reminds us of the strength it takes to face the truth, even when it breaks the world we thought we understood. Before you go, tell us in the comments, what do you think really happened that night? Do you believe Laura acted out of fear, heartbreak, or something else entirely? Your insight adds depth to these stories, and we read every single comment. And if this story moved you, If it made you reflect on your own experiences or on someone you once knew, don't leave just yet. We have more stories like this, real stories that challenge, surprise, and stay with you long after they end. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe so you never miss what comes next. And if you want another powerful story that will keep you thinking, check out the video on the case of a woman who discovered her husband's double life only after a strange message sent from his phone changed everything. Thank you for spending this time with us today. Take care of yourself, cherish the people in your life, and remember, truth has a way of finding its way to the surface, no matter how deeply it's buried.